The New Shadow. This tale begins in the days of Eldarion, son of that Elessar, of whom the histories have much to tell. 105 years had passed since the fall of the Dark Tower, and the story of that time was little heeded now by most of the people of Gondor, though a few were still living who could remember the War of the Ring as a shadow upon their early childhood. One of these was old Borlas of Pen Arduin. He was the younger son of Beregond, the first captain of the guard of Prince Faramir, who had removed with his lord from the city to the Emin. Deep indeed run the roots of evil, said Borlas, and the black sap is strong in them. That tree will never be slain. Let men hew it as often as they may, it will thrust up shoots again as soon as they turn aside. Not even at the feast of felling should the axe be hung upon the wall. Plainly you think you are speaking wise words, said Ceylon. I guess that by the gloom in your voice and by the nodding of your head. But what is this all about? Your life seems fair enough still, for an aged man that does not now go far abroad. Where have you found a shoot of your dark tree growing? In your own garden? Borlas looked up, and as he glanced keenly at Ceylon, he wondered suddenly if this young man, usually gay and often half-mocking, had more in his mind than appeared in his face. Borlas had not intended to open his heart to him, but being burdened in thought, he had spoken aloud, more to himself than his companion. Ceylon did not return his glance. He was humming softly while he trimmed a whistle of green willow with a sharp nail-knife. The two were sitting in an arbour near the steep eastern shores of Anduin, where it flowed about the feet of the hills of Arnon. They were indeed in Borlas's garden, and his small grey-stone house could be seen through the trees above them on the hill slope facing west. Borlas looked at the river and at the trees in their June leaves, and then far off to the towers of the city under the glow of late afternoon. No, not in my garden, he said thoughtfully. Then why are you so troubled? Asked Ceylon. If a man has a fair garden with strong walls, then he has as much as any man can govern for his own pleasure. He paused. As long as he keeps the strength of life in him, he added. When that fails, why trouble about any lesser ill? For then he must soon leave his garden at last, and others must look to the weeds. Borlas sighed, but he did not answer, and Ceylon went on, but there are, of course, some who will not be content, and to their life's end they trouble their hearts about their neighbours, and the city, and the realm, and all the wide world. You are one of them, Master Borlas, and have ever been so, since I first knew you as a boy, that you caught in your orchard. Even then you were not content to let ill alone, to deter me with a beating, or to strengthen your fences. No, you were grieved and wanted to improve me. You had me into your house and talked to me. I remember it well. Orc's work, you said many times. Stealing good fruit, well, I suppose that is no worse than boys' work, if they are hungry, or their fathers are too easy. But pulling down unripe apples to break or cast away, that is Orc's work. How did you come to do such a thing, lad? Orc's work? I was angered by that, Master Borlas, and too proud to answer, though it was in my heart to say in child's words, if it was wrong for a boy to steal an apple to eat, then it is wrong to steal one to play with, but not more wrong. Don't speak to me of Orc's work, or I may show you some. It was a mistake, Master Borlas, for I had heard tales of the Orcs and their doings, but I had not been interested till then. You turned my mind to them. I grew out of petty thefts, My father was not too easy, but I did not forget the orcs. I began to feel hatred and think of the sweetness of revenge. We played at orcs, I and my friends, and sometimes I thought, shall I gather my band and go and cut down his trees? Then he will think that the orcs have really returned. But that was a long time ago. Ceylon ended with a smile. Borlas was startled. He was now receiving confidences, not giving them. And there was something disquieting in the young man's tone, something that made him wonder whether deep down, as deep as the roots of the dark trees, the childish resentment did not linger still. Yes, even in the heart of Ceylon, the friend of his own son, and the young man who had in the last few years shown him much kindness in his loneliness. At any rate, he resolved to say no more of his own thoughts to him. Alas, he said, we all make mistakes. I do not claim wisdom, young man, except maybe the little that one may glean with the passing of the years, from which I know well enough the sad truth that those who mean well may do more harm than those who let things be. I am sorry now for what I said, if it roused hate in your heart, though I still think that it was just, untimely maybe, and yet true. Surely even a boy must understand that fruit is fruit and does not reach its full being until it is ripe, so that to misuse it unripe is to do worse than just to rob the man that has tended it. It robs the world, hinders a good thing from fulfillment. Those who do so join forces with all that is amiss, with the blights and the cankers and the ill winds. And that was the way of orcs. And is the way of men too, said Ceylon. No, I do not mean of wild men only, or those who grew under the shadow, as they say. I mean all men. I would not misuse green fruit now, but only because I have no longer any use for unripe apples, not for your lofty reasons, Master Borlas. Indeed, I think your reasons as unsound as an apple that has been too long in store. To trees, all men are orcs. Do men consider the fulfillment of the life story of a tree before they cut it down? For whatever purpose, to have its room for tilth, to use its flesh as timber or as fuel, or merely to open the view. If trees were the judges, would they set men above orcs, or indeed above the cankers and blights? What more right, they might ask, have men to feed on their juices than blights? A man, said Borlas, who tends a tree and guards it from blights, and many other enemies, does not act like an orc or a canker. If he eats its fruit, he does it no injury. It produces fruit more abundantly than it needs for its own purpose, the continuing of its kind. Let him eat the fruit then, or play with it, said Ceylon. But I spoke of slaying, hewing and burning, and by what right men do such things to trees. You did not. You spoke of the judgment of trees in these matters. But trees are not judges. The children of the one are the masters. My judgment as one of them you know already. The evils of the world were not at first in the great theme, but entered with the discords of Melkor. Men did not come with these discords. They entered afterwards as a new thing direct from Eru, the One, and therefore they are called his children. And all that was in the theme they have, for their own good, the right to use, rightly, without pride or wantonness, but with reverence. If the smallest child of a woodman feels the cold of winter, the proudest tree is not wronged, if it is bidden to surrender its flesh to warm the child with fire. But the child must not mar the tree in play or spite, rip its bark or break its branches, and the good husbandman will use first, if he can, dead wood or an old tree. He will not fell a young tree and leave it to rot, for no better reason than his pleasure in axe play. That is orcish. But it is even as I said, the roots of evil lie deep, and from far off comes the poison that works in us, so that many do these things, at times, and become then indeed like the servants of Melkor. But the orcs did these things at all times. They did harm with delight to all things that could suffer it, and they were restrained only by lack of power, not by either prudence or mercy. But we have spoken enough of this. Why, said Ceylon, we have hardly begun. It was not of your orchard, nor your apples, nor of me, that you were thinking when you spoke of the re-arising of the dark tree. What were you thinking of, Master Borlas? I can guess, none the less. I have eyes and ears, and other senses, master. His voice sank low, and could scarcely be heard above the murmur of a sudden chill wind in the leaves, as the sun sank behind Mindoluin. You have heard then the name. With hardly more than breath he formed it, of Herumor. Borlas looked at him with amazement and fear. His mouth made tremulous motions of speech, but no sound came from it. I see that you have, said Ceylon, and you seem astonished to learn that I have heard it also. But you are not more astonished than I was to see that this name has reached you, for, as I say, I have keen eyes and ears, but yours are now dim even for daily use, and the matter has been kept as secret as cunning could contrive. Whose cunning? Said Borlas, suddenly and fiercely. The sight of his eyes might be dim, but they blazed now with anger. Why, those who have heard the call of the name, of course, answered Ceylon, unperturbed. They are not many yet, to set against all the people of Gondor, but the number is growing. Not all are content since the great king died, and fewer now are afraid. So I have guessed, said Borlas, and it is that thought that chills the warmth of summer in my heart. For a man may have a garden with strong walls, Ceylon, and yet find no peace or content there. There are some enemies that such walls will not keep out, for his garden is only part of a guarded realm after all. It is to the walls of the realm that he must look for his real defense. But what is the call? What would they do? He cried, laying his hand on the young man's knee. I will ask you a question first before I answer yours, said Ceylon, and now he looked searchingly at the old man. How have you, who sit here in the eminent and seldom go now even to the city, how have you heard the whispers of this name? Borlas looked down on the ground and clasped his hands between his knees. For some time he did not answer. At last he looked up again. His face had hardened and his eyes were more wary. I will not answer that, Ceylon, he said, not until I have asked you yet another question. First, tell me, he said slowly, are you one of those who have listened to the call? A strange smile flickered across the young man's mouth. Attack is the best defense, he answered, or so the captains tell us. But when both sides use this counsel, there is a clash of battle. So I will counter you. I will not answer you, Master Borlas, until you tell me, are you one of those who have listened, or no? How can you think it? Cried Borlas. And how can you think it? Asked Ceylon. As for me, said Borlas, do not all my words give you the answer? But as for me, you would say, said Ceylon, my words might make me doubtful, because I defended a small boy who threw unripe apples at his playmates from the name of the orc, or because I spoke of the suffering of trees at the hands of men. Master Borlas, it is unwise to judge a man's heart from words spoken in an argument, without respect for your opinions. They may be meant to disturb you. Pert, maybe, but possibly better than a mere echo. I do not doubt that many of those we spoke of would use words as solemn as yours, and speak reverently of the great theme and such things in your presence. Well, who shall answer first? The younger it would have been in the courtesy of old, said Borlas. or between men counted as equals, the one who was first asked. You are both. Ceylon smiled. Very well, he said. Let me see. The first question that you asked unanswered was, what is the call? What would they do? Can you find no answer in the past for all your age and lore? I am young and less learned. Still, if you really wish to know, I could perhaps make the whispers clearer to you. He stood up. The sun had set behind the mountains. Shadows were deepening. The western wall of Borlas's house on the hillside was yellow in the afterglow, but the river below was dark. He looked up at the sky and then away down the Anduin. It is a fair evening still, he said, but the wind has shifted eastward. There will be clouds over the moon tonight. Well, what of it? Said Borlas, shivering a little as the air chilled. Unless you mean only to warn an old man to hasten indoors and keep his bones from aching. He rose and turned to the path towards his house, thinking that the young man meant to say no more, but Ceylon stepped up beside him and laid a hand on his arm. I warn you, rather, to clothe yourself warmly after nightfall, he said. That is, if you wish to learn more, for if you do, you will come with me on a journey tonight. I will meet you at your eastern gate behind your house, or at least I shall pass that way as soon as it is full dark, and you shall come or not, as you will. I shall be clad in black, and anyone who goes with me must be clad alike. Farewell now, Master Borlas. Take counsel with yourself while the light lasts. With that, Ceylon bowed and turned away, going along another path that ran near the edge of the steep shore, away northward to the house of his father. He disappeared round a bend, while his last words were still echoing in Borlas's ears. For some while after Ceylon had gone, Borlas stood still, covering his eyes and resting his brow against the cool bark of a tree beside the path. As he stood, he searched back in his mind to discover how this strange and alarming conversation had begun. What he would do after nightfall he did not yet consider. He had not been in good spirits since the spring, though well enough in body for his age, which burdened him less than his loneliness. Since his son, Berelach, had gone away in April, he was in the ships, and now lived mostly near Pelagir, where his duty was. Ceylon had been most attentive whenever he was at home. He went much about the lands of late. Borlas was not sure of his business, though he understood that, among other interests, he dealt in timber. He brought news from all over the kingdom to his old friend, or to his friend's old father, for Berelach had been his constant companion at one time, though they seemed seldom to meet nowadays. Yes, that was it, Borlas said to himself. I spoke to Ceylon of Pelargir, quoting Berelach. There has been some small disquiet down at the Ethir. A few shipmen have disappeared, and also a small vessel of the fleet. Nothing much, according to Berelach. Peace makes things slack, he said, I remember, in the voice of an under-officer. Well, they went off on some ploy of their own, I suppose. Friends in one of the western havens, perhaps, without leave and without a pilot. And they were drowned. It serves them right. We get too few real sailors these days. Fish are more profitable, but at least all know that the west coasts are not safe for the unskilled. That was all. But I spoke of it to Ceylon and asked if he had heard anything of it away south. Yes, he said, I did. Few were satisfied with the official view. The men were not unskilled. They were sons of fishermen. And there have been no storms off the coasts for a long time. As he heard Ceylon say this, suddenly Borlas had remembered the other rumours, the rumours that Othrondir had spoken of. It was he who had used the word canker, and then, half to himself, Borlas had spoken aloud about the dark tree. He uncovered his eyes and fondled the shapely trunk of the tree that he had leaned on, looking up at its shadowy leaves against the clear fading sky. A star glinted through the branches. Softly he spoke again, as if to the tree. Well, what is to be done now? Clearly, Ceylon is in it, but is it clear? There was the sound of mockery in his words, and the scorn of the ordered life of men. He would not answer a straight question. The black clothes. And yet, why invite me to go with him? Not to convert old Borlas. Useless. Useless to try. No one would hope to win over a man who remembered the evil of old, however far off. Useless if one succeeded. Old Borlas is of no use any longer as a tool for any hand. Ceylon might be trying to play the spy, seeking to find out what lies behind the whispers. Black might be a disguise, or an aid to stealth by night. But again, what could I do to help on any secret or dangerous errand? I should be better out of the way. With that, a cold thought touched Borlas's heart. Put out of the way, was that it? He was to be lured to some place where he could disappear like the shipman. The invitation to go with Ceylon had been given only after he had been startled into revealing that he knew of the whispers, had even heard the name, and he had declared his hostility. This thought decided Borlas, and he knew that he was resolved now to stand robed in black at the gate in the first dark of night. He was challenged, and he would accept. He smote his palm against the tree. I am not a dotard yet, Neldor, he said, but death is not so far off that I shall lose many good years, if I lose the throw. He straightened his back and lifted his head, and walked away up the path, slowly but steadily. The thought crossed his mind even as he stepped over the threshold. Perhaps I have been preserved so long for this purpose, that one should still live, hale in mind, who remembers what went before the great peace. Sent as a long memory, I think I could still smell the old evil and know it for what it is. The door under the porch was open, but the house behind was darkling. There seemed none of the accustomed sounds of evening, only a soft silence, a dead silence. He entered, wondering a little. He called, but there was no answer. He halted in the narrow passage that ran through the house, and it seemed that he was wrapped in a blackness. Not a glimmer of twilight of the world outside remained there. Suddenly he smelt it, or so it seemed, though it came, as it were, from within, outwards to the sense. He smelt the old evil and knew it for what it was. Note by Christopher Tolkien. Here, both in A and B, the new shadow ends, and it will never be known what Borlas found in his dark and silent house, nor what part Ceylon was playing, and what his intentions were. There would be no tales worth the telling in the days of the king's peace, my father said, and he disparaged the story that he had begun. I could have written a thriller about the plot and its discovery and overthrow, but it would be just that, not worth doing. It would nonetheless have been a very remarkable thriller, and one may well view its early abandonment with regret. But it may be that his reason for abandoning it was not only this, Or perhaps rather that in saying this he was expressing a deeper conviction, that the vast structure of a story in many forms that he had raised came to its true end in the downfall of Sauron. As he wrote, Sauron was a problem that men had to deal with finally, the first of the many concentrations of evil into definite power points that they would have to combat, as it was also the last of those in mythological, personalized, but non-human form.